Okay, so what's the argument in favor of Donald Trump? To me, the way I see libertarianism, it has views on three different areas. One is economics, another is personal liberties, and a third is foreign policy. And the problem I have with the Nolan chart and all these other charts is they only do economics and personal liberties. Now, I'm an economist. I think economics is pretty important. But I think foreign policy is more important. Not only more important, but a ton more important, if I could categorize it that way. Not only do I think it's more important than either of them, but it's more important than both of them put together. So why is it that foreign policy is more important than the other two put together? For two reasons. One, foreign policy kills a lot of people, and I'm sort of pro-life.
All right. My name is Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, of course, by our super producer, Jake Appett, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. And the voice you just heard was a, returning character from an early season, but a beloved GTA Extended Universe character, Walter Block. And that is a clip of him in 2016 giving the libertarian case for Donald Trump that, whatever his economic views or social views, what really mattered was that Donald Trump was an anti-interventionist. And this was good because, otherwise so many people would die from Hillary Clinton's foreign policy. And I certainly don't disagree with the critique of Hillary. I think that the assessment of Trump is insane. But this is really striking in light of this debate that I just had with him that we're going to be showing you tonight about Israel-Palestine, because I have to say, can watch the debate, you be a judge for yourself, but all of these reservations about killing people really seem to be out the window with this topic.
Yeah, did he seem pro-life to you in his debate, or that seems like is that dropping on the list of concerns?
I think that might have dropped somewhere on the list of concerns. That seems to be pretty distantly down the list when he gives his thoughts about Gaza. So I should say that yes, this is that same Walter Block who had, I think, two legendary debates with Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. And I also debated him once before. I actually debated him in one of the first episodes of the show. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but it was definitely
like the first 10 or something.
Yeah, it was definitely within that range. This is where we had the classic Walter Block observation that if he were the king of the black people, his first priority would be to get rid of the minimum wage because it led to unemployment.
Even if that's what you think, well, I guess that's why you had to say he's king, not democratically elected president of the black people, because I gotta say, I don't think that would pull very well. But I guess if you're an absolute monarch, you know what I mean? If you became king of the black people and you're like, hey, the first thing I'm going to do is cut minimum wage, I feel like there might be, even if you seriously believe that, you also want to prevent some kind of uprising. And I feel like, I don't know. I just don't think that would pull very well, but
yeah, that is definitely a concern. For anybody who's considering, making a bid for that throne, these are things to think about. But in any case, I'm going to give the context for this particular debate in just a moment, and then we can actually watch it. But first, I don't want this to get lost. So one of the things that I said at the beginning of the episode, as I always do, is we're joined by Jake and by our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World, and talented though he is, the task does require tools. And related to that, I know we've got a fundraiser going.
Yeah, we got a fundraiser going. Sorry, it's just it's just emotionally taxing too. But yeah, no, the tool that I use is the iPad, mostly because scanners don't seem to I spent a lot of money on a scanner, updated my computer, couldn't use it anymore. So the iPad lets me kind of bypass some of that stuff. But it allows me to crank out work and believe it or not, speed up things because I can just drop layers. I don't have to spend hours erasing and waiting for ink to dry. So it's been a wonderful switch, and I feel like I've been my output has increased with it, and all of a sudden my iPad stopped taking a charge, and I felt like adrift this past week. Not having my main tool with me.
Yeah, and I know, yeah, been to the Apple store, been to another store, etc. There's no fixing it, right? So,
yeah, there's like 3 options. Well, 2 options really. Well, the third option is do nothing, but yeah,
sure, yeah, not counting that, right?
Yeah. The 2 options is to get it replaced, which they will sell me a refurbished one, be the exact same model, refurbished, certified by Apple. Which the other option is to buy a brand new one, and them suckers are expensive either way, because I actually have a make sure that I have a lot of memory, because I use a lot of memory because it's just full of artwork.
Yeah. So yeah, these things are very expensive, and if anybody was under the impression that anybody who works at a socialist podcast is raking in cash hand over fist, then this is going to be a sad day for you, because I'm going to destroy that dream. But that is not the case, right? None of us are making very much money off of this. Andy, like myself, is somebody who's always juggling 100 different gigs. But the nature of that, right, is that all of them put together, don't leave a lot in the bank, when stuff like this happens.
Yeah, especially with it being back to school, and I have to be buying new shoes for my kid.
Yeah. So we started the GoFundMe on Thursday, Friday, and
Friday.
Yeah, it's a bit over half funded now, right? So we're on our way, but if you enjoy the artwork that Andy does for this show, which is all of it, for this show, or the like really beautiful drawings he does every week for the Substack that I do, or the artwork he does for Movie Night Extravaganza, or any number of other things, there are bands you may have seen, etc. This is how it all gets done, right? So if you enjoy it and you want to see more of it, then either, like, if you're on the brink of death and you're wealthy and you want to and you want to make me your heir, then like I'll suddenly be in a position to just buy Andy a new iPad. So that works too, right? But if that doesn't describe your current circumstances, this isn't your last night on earth that you're spending watching me debate Walter Block, although I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to spend it that way. Wondering what to do with your great fortune. But if you were just a regular person, then you can donate like $20 or $30 or something to the GoFundMe, goes a long way. And please do consider doing that. There is a link down below the box where you are watching us, the 3 of us, speak right now. Okay. Let's set up this debate. So a little while ago, there was, so Walter wrote a article for Merion West, which is a magazine I've also been in before. It's been a very long time, but I think me and Matt McManus wrote something for them a zillion years ago, called Yes to a Palestinian State, just not inside or right next to Israel, which is a confusing formulation for many reasons. That, for one thing, if you're going to, talk about just doing, mass ethnic cleansing and, kicking people out of the country, if you're still, deported them to some other Middle Eastern country, then, that will still be right next to Israel. If you glance at a map, but, editors of Merion West got in touch with me because they'd actually, so one of them does a podcast where he'd interviewed me very recently about the encampments. This was all, I don't know, a few months ago, maybe, I don't remember exactly. And asked if I wanted to write a response to it. And, I think he might've known I debated, Professor Block once years ago. And yeah, and I read it, and honestly I found it pretty shocking, because look, it's not like I was under any impression that Walter Block shares my views about like anything, right? In the normal course of things, right? I mean, clearly not. He is such a fanatically extreme libertarian, I think he literally doesn't believe there should be public sidewalks, right? And obviously the sort of central premise of my political life is exactly the opposite of that. Nevertheless, I thought I had a read on what made him tick ideologically, and I just couldn't for the life of me see how it was compatible with this sort of, ultra Zionist position that he was taking now, right? That, is that like the, because of Palestinian terrorism, Palestinians should be, collectively punished in this way, that they have, there shouldn't be a separate Palestinian state, but also presumably, right? And, in fact, I think I do get him to say this directly in the debate. Presumably he also doesn't want, Israel to, turn itself into a real democracy by just giving citizenship to everybody within its current borders that it's held since 1967, right? All the people who live in like the West Bank, where, there are all these Israeli settlers who live and, have full rights that anybody would have. So he doesn't want that. And he also doesn't want there to be a Palestinian state. So if you don't want a two-state solution, you don't want a democratic one-state solution, the absolute best case scenario is that, you want, to paraphrase George Wallace, right? Apartheid yesterday, apartheid today, apartheid forever. And of course, what he's suggesting in this article is much worse than that, right? It would go much further, it would actually be like mass expulsion, a la, like the sort of crimes that we associate with people like Slobodan Milosevic. And man, that does not sound very libertarian to me. Right? If libertarianism is all about individual rights and individual property rights, I mean, it's like, look, I mean, I don't support individual property rights in the means of production, but it's like, my God, I mean, even I support individual property rights in like your house. And, if you're going to say, oh, you have to leave now because you're a member of an ethnic group that we've decided is like collectively bad, this sounds like more or less the least libertarian thing I've ever heard in my life. And so I wrote a response to it as requested for Merion West. The title they put on that, and I think was just relocation. Yeah, in reply to Walter Block, relocation must be off the table. And I made a lot of these points there, basically just talked about how one of the reasons I thought it was even worth, replying to the original article. I mean, I do say at the beginning that my first thought when they asked me if I wanted to write a response to this article is that the article already responds to itself, and there's kind of nothing I could add. But then my second thought was, okay, well, look, in a lot of ways, I think what Netanyahu is already doing is kind of, the diet version of the Walter Block plan. And a lot of apologists for that in the West think that they're great believers in democracy and human rights and all this stuff. And so I think it is actually worth taking somebody who has the whatever it is to openly and unabashedly advocate this without the equivocation and dissembling that you get in the Netanyahu version, and sort of explore that deep incompatibility. And then Walter wrote a response to me. So why I stand by relocation, a rejoinder to Ben Burgess, and he takes this kind of confusing line in this article about how, okay, technically speaking, from the perspective of pure libertarian principles, this would be bad, but it's a messy world, and sometimes you can't do everything according to pure libertarian principles, so you have to revert to this looser conception of, it says, classical liberalism, which it does seem to me that if classical liberalism is incompatible with anything, it's ethnic cleansing. So to me, this clarifies very little. But by the time he wrote the response, I'd already extended the invite. Who had said, look, I don't criticize people without giving them a chance to come on the show and respond. So you're exactly, newly pragmatic Walter Block. That's exactly the right way to say that. And so here's your invite. And he said he'd be happy to do a discussion. He didn't want to do it like on the show exactly, but we ended up pre-recording something with Jonathan Church, who's one of the two main editors, I think, at Merion West, as the moderator, and is timed. If you remember those, if you've seen Walter Block's previous debates, keeping track of time is extremely important to him, right? So it's timed. And then they sent us the recording last week, and I think they're simultaneously putting it out on their platform. I'm actually not 100% sure what that is, but in any case, we've got it now. So unless you guys have anything to add, should we
welcome to this?
Go ahead and watch the debate?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this because I really want to see a libertarian square off against the idea, what happened during the Nakba. So,
Yeah. I mean, he's essentially advocating,
Nakba to the Electric Boogaloo.
Precisely. All right, let's give it a watch. Oh, sorry.
This is really important. I was going to say, this is the same man in 3 stages of, I like imagining he started off on the bottom, then it became you. He started as a centrist liberal, then became a socialist, and then finally Walter Block. Well, anyway, that was important.
Well, whereas I don't think that's true, I will say one extremely funny piece of trivia. We actually talked about it at the beginning of his appearance in the show in 2020 about Walter Block, is that he went to high school with Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
They were actually on the track team together. So just the more you know. But in any case, so I don't know if at this point I'm the socialist that he knows the second best. But in any case, let's watch the debate.
So welcome to this debate on Palestinian statehood between economics professor Walter Block and philosophy professor Ben Burgess. The debate is a joint production of Professor Burgess's YouTube channel, Give Them an Argument, and the magazine Merion West, which is a publication devoted to independent thought, engagement with ideas across the political and ideological spectrum. Debate will be hosted by yours truly, Jonathan Church, contributing editor at Merion West, host of Merion West Escaping Ideology podcast series. So for some brief background for the audience, the impetus for this debate was a provocative article that Walter, if I may, wrote for Merion West in June, which is followed by a lengthy rebuttal from Ben and a further response from Walter. Now, you can clarify this in your opening statements, but as I understand it, the basic point for Walter is, October 7th was the last straw. Israel is dealing with an enemy that builds tunnel systems as sophisticated as the London Underground, the New York subway, launches constant rocket attacks, sends suicide bombers into Israel, and now October 7th. So essentially, Palestinians have proved themselves unworthy of, quote, living in the only true democracy in the Middle East. If they deserve a state, and I guess I should emphasize that word if for Walter, it has to be outside Judea, Samaria, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and Gaza. Ben, and again, you can clarify as well, as I understand it, you respond by saying not so fast. Not only is it not at all clear how this could work, but it sounds very much like ethnic cleansing, which, by the way, seems to directly violate the non-aggression principle of the libertarian philosophy of which Walter is so fond. So obviously we don't do any of this. The real answer here is, aside from apprehending the Hamas operatives without imposing collective punishment on the Palestinian people, is to unwind the apartheid state that is Israel. So that's my understanding of the articles that you have read, have written. And finally, I'm just, for the audience, again, I'm just going to briefly state the basic conditions of the debate. The basic proposition, as I understand it from Walter's article, is if the Palestinian people deserve a state, the state should exist outside the borders of Israel and the occupied territories, more specifically, not in Israel, Gaza, the Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Walter is for, Ben is against. And before we proceed, Walter will have 10 minutes to open with his argument. Ben will have 10 minutes to present a rebuttal. You don't have to use all the 10 minutes, and to the extent that you don't, it will allow for more back and forth as we move forward. After that, I'll have a question for each of you, one that challenges Walter, one that challenges Ben. I'll start with Walter. He'll have 5 minutes. Ben will have 5 minutes to respond. And at that point, I'd have a second question, or I'd have a question for Ben. But before that, I want to make some allowance for some back and forth. So if Walter wants to respond to what Ben said, and then Ben wants to respond to Walter, and so on. Obviously, we don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but we'll play it by ear. And I think maybe 3 minutes per person in the back and forth. Then I'll proceed to ask Ben his question. He'll have 5 minutes. Walter will have 5 minutes, and we'll do the same thing again. And then I think, was that the second? So I think I have a second set of questions, but we'll see how it proceeds. So we'll have 2 openings and then some back and forth, basically. And then this should get us to about an hour or so. And my proposal is that each of you have 5 minutes to make a closing argument. And as I stated in the, prior to the introduction here, there'll be a time clock for each of you. So let me get that time clock up. Okay. I guess I'll start it once Walter begins. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Walter to make his opening argument. Walter, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks, Jonathan, for putting this together. And I also want to thank Ben. There are several critics of mine who refused to debate me. Hans Hoppe, Tom DiLorenzo, Ryan McMakin, Mike Rechtenwald, among others. They take pot shots at me, but refuse to interact with me. And I'm very grateful to Ben for not being like that, but being a true scholar. There are really 3 issues, the way I see it. One is, who owns the property under contention? Secondly, is the Israeli army, the IDF, guilty of genocide and other evil activities? And third, and here I compliment Ben again, my contradictions. I compliment Ben because he sees contradiction in what I say. And he therefore exhibits more knowledge about my position than I do about his. So I'm grateful to him for that. And I should explain why I'm contradicting myself. The reason I'm contradicting myself is that ordinarily I write as an anarcho-capitalist. And as an anarcho-capitalist, there are certain principles that I forward. But in the case of Israel, I don't write as an anarcho-capitalist, and therefore I seem to contradict myself. Or, if you want, I do contradict myself because I'm purposely taking on a different position. And the two positions are not exactly congruent. They are at least contrary to each other, if not contradictory. The anarcho-capitalist view is predicated on property rights based on homesteading, and the essence of it is the non-aggression principle. And there, that's an anarchist position because governments are necessarily violative of that. They demand money, and we haven't agreed to pay them. And any other group that does that, they're a bunch of thieves. So government is a bunch of thieves. However, in my book, co-authored with Alan Fuderman, I take a classical liberal position of Milton Friedman and Hayek, which does not say that all governments are quintessentially per se evil. And why do I do this? Because of my mentor and guru and friend Murray Rothbard, who wrote an article in 1967 against sectarianism. Because if you take the anarcho-capitalist view, you just criticize all governments. And Murray beseeches us, if I could put words in his mouth, to distinguish between some governments and others. And if they're all evil, it's hard to distinguish between them. So I hope that that clarifies Ben's excellent point about my contradiction. Now let me talk about homesteading. John Locke is sort of our guru about who gets to own stuff. And his view is the first one who mixes his labor with the land is the owner of it. Now, a lot of people say that the Israelis are colonists, Johnny-come-latelys. They were not there, and the Arabs or the Palestinians were there first. No. The second temple is built on top, below the mosque. Well, which comes first? What's below or what's above? Obviously, what's below comes first. The Kohanim, 2,000 years ago, and there are no statutes of limitations, were there first, and the Muslims, the Islamic people, came much later. The Jews have been in business, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 years. The Islam, I think they're dated from 600. That would make it, I don't know, 1,500 years, 1,600 years. They're not the first occupiers. The first occupiers are the legitimate title holders. And I think it's clear that the Jews were there first. It's true they got kicked out by the Romans, but that doesn't count because when you lose land based on that sort of a thing, it doesn't count, at least not for the classical liberal perspective. Now let's turn to 1948, when a lot of Palestinians were, I suppose Ben would say, I don't want to put words in his mouth, would say were kicked out of their properly titled property. The way I see it is a little different. The way I see it, some Palestinians in 1947, 1948 left because they want to go on vacation. Who knows? Others might have left because they were afraid that there'd be a war. If Israel became a country, the Arab countries surrounding it wouldn't like it, and there might be a war, and they were afraid of a war. Again, totally innocent. However, there's a third group, and I don't say it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, I don't know. But there's a third significant group that was told by the 5 invading armies, get out. Get out of Palestine or get out of Israel. Why? Because if you stay there, it's going to be hard for us to kill all the Jews. Whereas if you leave, we won't have to distinguish friend from foe. We'll just kill them all, and that'll be that. And they left, and they were told, leave, and in 2 weeks we'll wipe up all the Jews, and you can come back. Well, it didn't exactly work out that way, and Israel regarded these people as traitors and didn't much want them to come back, and they were put in all sorts of camps to show the evil of the Jews. At around the exact same time, And by the way, this is about 900,000 Palestinians, maybe a million, give or take, somewhere in there. At about the same time, the same number, roughly the same number, somewhere between 800,000 and a million Jews were kicked out of Egypt and Iraq and Iran and Lebanon and all the other countries, Syria. They were totally innocent. There were no traitors there. They were kicked out. What should have happened, if there was any reasonable accommodation, would have been that the Jews took over the Arab lands that they were kicked out of and not allowed to return to, and the Palestinians took over the Jewish lands that they were kicked out of and not allowed to return to either. But that didn't happen, and everybody forgets about the fact that the Jews, roughly 900,000, were had their land stolen too. So it's not just that the Israelis won't allow the Palestinians back, it's the obverse or the opposite as well. The next issue I'd like to bring up is this bit of collateral damage. According to Hamas statistics, some 40,000 people have been killed. And this is very bad because many of them were innocent. They were women and children. And Israel is blamed for genocide. Well, to me, genocide is purposefully aiming at civilians. If you aim at soldiers, that's not genocide, that's just war. But if you aim at civilians, that's genocide. Well, the Israelis do everything they can not to do that. They send out flyers saying, look, we're going to bomb this place. Why are we going to bomb this place? Because Hamas has got rocket launchers in the middle of a mosque, in the middle of a school, in the middle of a hospital, in the middle of a residential area. And Israel, oh, they're weirdos. They don't like being bombed, and they want to stop those rocket launchers. And the Hamas uses the Palestinians, the Arabs, the Gazans as shields. Now, I want to illustrate something in a dramatic way. Here is a pig, and here is a bunny rabbit. And I'm now going to kill you, Jonathan. I'm kidding, of course. I have no intention to kill you. Here is my knife. Well, it's a pen, but what the heck. And I've got the bunny rabbit and the pig strapped to the front of me. And you, Jonathan, you have a gun. And but your back is at the wall, and you can't escape. I'm faster than you, and I'm coming at you. I'm going to kill you because I don't like your gray shirt and those earphones. They're just horrible. And I'm going to kill you. And the only way you can stop me is by shooting me. And you got a gun and I've got a knife. The gun is more powerful. You're Israel. I'm Hamas. I'm less powerful than you. And here's the bunny rabbit and here's the pig. And but these are people. They're not animals. I was looking for statues of people. I couldn't find any. The only way you can stop me is by shooting me. And the only way you can get me is through them. And now you have a choice. You can let me kill you, and let me kill you, your wife and your kids also, which you don't much like, or you can shoot me in self-defense. But if you shoot me in self-defense, you get these innocent people. Well, what do? I think you're entitled to shoot me because I'm a bad guy. I'm Hamas. Now they say that. What is it? The IDF is guilty of genocide. No, when you aim at civilians, that's genocide. Well,
Okay.
Well, my
So-
time is it.
Yep. So let me make an executive decision here. I have a feeling that you have maybe a few more minutes that you wanted to say.
Yeah.
And so Ben will obviously get the same amount of time. So let's say you say 1 minute.
Yeah, just a minute to wrap it up.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that, yes, it's very sad that 40,000 people were killed, although the ratio between civilians and military is among the highest. Namely, Israel is the least guilty of this sort of a thing of any country. So it's very bad, but that's collateral damage. That's what happens with war. And the Hamas started that war on October 7th. And Israel is just trying to defend itself and make sure that the October 7th 2 doesn't occur. Thanks for the extra 30 seconds or whatever.
Let me set it up to 11. And we will hand it over to Ben.
All right, thank you. I am sure I'm not going to get to everything that was just said, but I'm going to try to at least address most of the main points with the hope that whatever is left over we can do in the subsequent discussion after the statements, and that I'm at least sort of giving people a sense of how I see the larger disagreement. So on the question of indigeneity, of like which ethnic group is where first, my position is that I could not care less about that question as a general matter. My ancestors didn't live in California, where I do. In fact, some of my ancestors lived in Israel. But I think that I still have a right to live in California, and it would be wrong to ethnically cleanse me from California. That I think that is an absolutely universal principle. I also think that Walter's understanding of 1948, while it's certainly a very common narrative that I heard many, many times over the decades, I think is just not true. The idea that people were fleeing en masse because of radio broadcasts telling them that this would somehow make it easier to commit atrocities, although that's not how committing atrocities ever works normally in other wars, I think has been thoroughly debunked by Israeli historians, some of whom, like Benny Morris, are actually extremely right-wing and support everything Netanyahu is doing. But in their capacity as historians, they said, no, that's just not true. Here's the evidence. I think that, to my mind, this is a very, very simple issue, right? So my position is that ethnic cleansing is never acceptable, full stop. No human being should ever be removed from the place where they live if they're being removed not because of anything they did, but because of their membership in some larger ethnic or racial or religious category. Normally, I would hope that this would go without saying, like making a big point of insisting that sunshine is good and Nazis are bad. But sadly, this is no longer a purely hypothetical discussion. In the last 10 months, the ultra-right-wing government of Bibi Netanyahu has evicted literally millions of Palestinian civilians from their homes. At a casual glance, this looks a whole lot like Netanyahu, at least partially implementing what some of his most important ministers in his cabinet have openly advocated for their whole political careers, which is the mass removal of the entire Palestinian population. Especially because the alternative explanation doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We were told that Palestinians had to be evacuated from northern Gaza because it was an urban battlefield from which they had to be removed to keep them safe from the IDF's bombs. And then, as who could have predicted, the IDF indiscriminately bombed the hell out of them in southern Gaza. And we were told that this was necessary because Hamas supposedly uses them as human shields, as in the bunny, rabbit, and pig example, which of course is an accusation that Israel has regularly made for decades. And after every new war, international human rights organizations come in the aftermath, investigate the evidence. They always say it's not true, but Israel keeps saying that it is. One way or the other, though, I don't think there's a way to fit the square peg of the human shields argument into the round hole of the evacuating the urban battlefield excuse. Take a beat to think about this. We're told that millions of people had to be violently forced marched out of their homes because otherwise they'd be bombed. And out of the other side of Netanyahu's mouth, we're told that the urban battlefield is wherever Palestinian civilians are, because always and everywhere, Hamas uses them as human shields, so it's fine to bomb them everywhere. Let's live in the real world a little here and acknowledge that Netanyahu is already doing the Walter Block plan, or at least the first step of the Walter Block plan, because it seems to me that Walter's plan would have to involve a double ethnic cleansing. Several million more Palestinians would be evicted from the West Bank and Gaza and violently forced marched to some other location that would be the site of the Palestinian state. And presumably all the people living in that other location would have to be cleared out to make room for a Palestinian state there, a la 1948 in reverse. I think that this really seems like a horrifying proposal to me, but even putting aside that moral evaluation, I find the logic of Walter's plan very confusing given my prior experience of him. This isn't our first debate. In fact, Walter was one of the earliest guests on my show. I thought we had a good discussion. I'm a democratic socialist. He's such a hardcore libertarian. He doesn't think there should be public sidewalks. So we had a lot to argue about, but I thought I understood how he sees the world. And his article made me question that. So Walter thinks taxation to pay for universal health care, for example, would be, and I quote, outright theft. Of course, theft just means taking something you have no right to take. So the question of whether it's theft depends on who has a right to the dollars in question, which is the whole issue and dispute. Walter thinks everyone has a right to 100% of their pre-tax income, even if that means that sometimes diabetics die, to use my example from the first article, because they're trying to ration out their insulin, something that, by the way, happens in the United States, but not in, for example, Canada. I think this extreme conception of property rights goes way too far. To steal a line from George Kateb's classic review of Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia, I find it impossible to conceive of us as having nerve endings in every dollar of our estates. But if you think about the whole ideological range of views about how extensive property rights should be, with Walter bookending one end of the spectrum and the most hardcore socialists who maybe, want to nationalize the corner convenience store on the other end, one thing I would hope we would all agree on is that people at least have a right to their homes and their personal belongings. And this is exactly the right that's been denied to millions of Palestinians in the last 10 months. Check out the nonstop stream of TikTok and Instagram videos posted by Israeli soldiers who film themselves fondling lingerie or playing with the children's toys in the homes of Palestinian civilians who fled for their lives. And it's the right that he wants to deny to millions more Palestinians, along with presumably denying it to millions of non-Palestinians who currently live in the location of, the future Palestinian state he'd be willing to contemplate because it's somewhere else. This, as he says, as we just heard him say, strikes me as a massive contradiction. If I understand what he just said correctly, which is more or less what he said in the second Merion West article, he thinks that this contradiction can be squared by saying, oh, I'm not speaking from the perspective of absolutist libertarianism, I'm speaking from the perspective of classical liberalism, because absolutist libertarianism would sort of equally condemn everything because nothing lives up to its ideal. So you go to classical liberalism as, plan B as a way of navigating a messy world and trying to push it in your general direction. And I think the basic move is, perfectly respectable. In fact, in many ways, this is a sort of right-wing mirror image of how I often think about politics, but I cannot for the life of me see how it's supposed to help him escape this contradiction. A more moderate version of market-friendly classical liberalism than, Rothbardian libertarianism doesn't define property rights in a way that's so broad that taxation and sidewalks violate it. But classical liberals do still very much believe in universal rights and universal individual rights that can't be taken away because of the actions of other members of your ethnic group. And even the most minimalistic list of those rights would have to include a right against violent ethnic cleansing as a matter of course. Minimal rights just do not get more minimal than that. And by the way, classical liberals also tend to believe that one of those universal rights we should all have just for being a person is the right to self-government. We hold these rights to be self-evident, no taxation without representation, that sort of thing. And this takes me to the final point that I want to make. Walter's article was called Yes to a Palestinian State, just not right inside or next to Israel. But now he clarifies that this was, says in arguendo, right? That is to say, he says he wasn't talking, he wasn't actually advocating what I would regard as the extreme crimes against humanity envisioned in the article. He was just hypothetically advocating them on the assumption that Palestinians deserve a state. Fine, let's take that at face value. But where does that leave us? If he's not actually advocated the sort of double ethnic cleansing that we remove all 5.3 million Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza, not sure if the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, many of whom are actually being slow motion expelled already, or the Palestinians who are within the Green Line are also expelled, but let's say 5.3 million, we force march them to some other place, having to kill lots of them in the process, because that's how all acts of ethnic mass expulsion in human history have worked. This would absolutely not be an exception. And then we somehow clear out the people in the site of the future off-site Palestinian state. That's not where the Palestinians actually live. So let's say he's not actually advocating that, right? But remember, what does that leave us? Right? What does he advocate that? Because if he doesn't actually want to kick out all of the Palestinians, then that leaves us with two options. Either he is advocating what I would regard as Israel, turning itself into a real democracy by simply granting citizenship to everyone within the borders that it's ruled over since 1967. That, by the way, would be my ideal theory, right? My purest first choice if I thought I could get it. Or he's advocating a two-state solution. Well, I know that's not it, right? Because he said this is all if Palestinians deserve a state, and he doesn't accept the if. So that, I'm pretty sure he's not advocating a binational state. In fact, in his second article responding to me, he defended Israel legally prohibiting parties that advocate a binational state from even being allowed to participate in elections. So that means he's advocating the status quo forever, that if you're a Palestinian who spent the last 50, 70 years living under Israeli military rule, you should forever.
Go ahead, finish that point.
And this strikes me as a recipe for permanently denying millions of people absolutely basic rights. And I cannot for the life of me see what that has to do with classical liberalism.
Okay, great. So I did have a question, but I did see Walter frantically writing at times. And I can only assume that there are several points he'd like to address immediately. So I'll give you 3 minutes to address.
Okay, thank you. Israel is not ethnically cleansing anyone. Israel is not doing apartheid. There are Arabs who are judges in Israel. There are Arabs who are policemen. There are Arabs who are politicians. They even have a political party in the Knesset. We're talking about people responsible for October 7th. And that wasn't the people in Samaria and Judea, sometimes called the West Bank. This is the Gazans. This criticism, well, first they're in North Gaza, then they're bombed, they're south. That's Israel's attempt to try to save them. And I don't think Ben appreciates that Israel first doesn't bomb people at leaflets. Does the U.S. ever do that? Did the U.S. drop leaflets in Germany or Italy or Japan? No. Israel is too soft. They're dropping leaflets and telling people to move away. And then they have to move away again because Hamas follows them. And Israel is trying to save them, and Ben is regarding them as sort of war criminals. Now, with this bit about diabetics die, there'll be many fewer diabetics dying if we have free enterprise than if we have socialism. If we have socialism, a lot more people will die. Free enterprise means prosperity. Wealthier is healthier. The richer you are, the healthier you are. Right to homes. How do they have right to homes if there's a rocket launcher right next door? That means that Israel can't bomb rocket launchers. What? They have to be pacifists? They have to commit suicide? This seems to be what Ben wants. About forced marches, the Israeli government did engage in a forced march. In 2005, what they did is they told every Jew in Gaza, get out. They compelled them to get out. That means they're Nazis? No, they wanted to have a second state. In effect, ever since 2005 or 2007, Gaza was a second state. And what did they do with that second state? Did they build the hotels and I don't know, desalinization plants? No, they built rocket launchers. They built tunnels from which to go out and kill Israelis. One possibility is that the Gazans stay there. You know what the Gazans do? They educate their kids to hate Jews. Golda Meir once.
You have a sentence or two to clear it up.
Golda Meir once said that the peace will come when the Arabs, the Palestinians, the Gazans love their children more than they hate us. right now, they hate us more than they love their children. So they engage in child abuse by telling their kids to hate Jews and to do another October 7th. Yes, they shouldn't have a state. Not everybody should have a state. They're a bunch of criminals. And Israel should make sure that the education system for them is not the way it has been.
Okay. Okay, Ben, and I'm going, actually, I am going to put an extra 30 seconds on there because Walter went over 30 seconds. So get that. Okay, go ahead to Ben, to the extent you want to respond to that. I think you're muted.
My apologies. So, yeah, I think that if you believe that there is a rocket launcher under every apartment block, every mosque, every church, every school, every refugee camp, every cancer ward that Israel has bombed over the course of the last 10 months, then you will believe anything. That is, I think that is just on the face of it, not a plausible claim about reality. Israel has been far more indiscriminate in its bombing than any other country has been. I know people routinely say the opposite, but that's just not reality. And that's not even what Israeli politicians themselves pretend at this point. The Knesset just had a big debate over the ethics of raping prisoners, where a lot of Israeli politicians were defending the rape at Sde Timon. Some of them participated in a mob that tried to storm the detention camp to stop the perpetrators of that mass rape from being arrested. You even go back and look at like Gallant's initial comments when it started, and he said, no food is getting in, no Gus is getting in. We're fighting human animals, and we're going to act accordingly. I think that there is an enormous chasm between the rhetoric of Israeli politicians themselves, who are much more honest, and the rhetoric of their defenders in the West, who are still reciting all of these lines on autopilot from previous wars about how it's the most moral army in the world. It's much more careful. In reality, Russia, for example, has been widely and appropriately condemned for the indiscriminate nature of its bombing campaign in Ukraine. And over the course of years of that, they have killed far fewer civilians in Ukraine, despite having many, many times the population than Israel has killed in Gaza. The reality is they're actually far more indiscriminate than the United States has been, than Russia has been, et cetera. Look at the numbers from Iraq versus Gaza, et cetera. Okay, the idea that Israel isn't doing apartheid because there are Arab judges and Arab policemen and Arab members of Knesset is another one of these lines that I've been hearing for decades, and it doesn't get more convincing on the retelling. So it is, two things are true. One, Palestinians who, it's the exact same population. It's not that they made different choices or their politics are different or their religion is different. None of that stuff is true. Palestinians who escaped the initial ethnic cleansing in 1948 were eventually, it took about 20 years, but they were eventually given citizenship within the Green Line in Israel, and they have many of those rights. But where the apartheid comes in is that there are millions of other Palestinians who have not been given citizenship, even though they've been ruled over for 57 years, solely because they have the wrong ethnicity, and giving them citizenship would change the ethnic character of the state. Again, Israeli politicians themselves are much more honest about this. The idea that Gaza was in any sense a state, I think, is completely wrong. I think it's as wrong could be, but I'm also running out of time. So I'm very happy to revisit that as the debate goes on.
Okay, great. So I do have a question for Walter, which may be peripherally or maybe even more closely related to what Ben was saying, and also might allow, hopefully allow Walter to respond. The basic question is, so in the course of reading the articles and generally just following this war in general, you point out, yes, the Palestinians have voted for Hamas. They support Hamas in the polls. They've cheered the events of October 7th, martyr payments, and all the things that you point out. Still, it seems very obvious to me that this does not mean that they should be, the Palestinian civilians in general, held responsible for actions that were specifically planned by Hamas leaders, and perhaps there are state sponsors committed by, Hamas operatives. So it's, and, in addition, it's not as if they live in the kind of open society with which we are familiar in the West, free flow of information, pluralistic political culture, a well-developed economy, a well-functioning civil life, and so on, all the things that we know. So they obviously are living in very dire positions, in conditions. So the basic point I'm getting is, given that they live in these conditions, it would basically put anyone in a state of despair and make them very susceptible to militant propaganda, etc. Are we not conflating, in your proposal here, are you not conflating the Palestinian citizens with Hamas? I mean, why should we hold Palestinians effectively responsible for the actions of Hamas?
I don't hold the Palestinians responsible. I have to reintroduce my pig and my.
Well, I think I want to just say effectively responsible, I say, because if the issue is to, as Ben would say, ethnically cleanse them to another place, you're essentially, at least many people would, I think, would say that that is effectively punishing them for the acts of Hamas.
Who's punishing them? Yes, they're being punished. I agree. It's a horrible situation. 40,000 of them have died, if we can trust the Hamas statistics, which I'm not sure about, but let's stipulate that that's true. Who is responsible? Who is responsible for the death of this rabbit and this pig? It's not the IDF. You dirty rat. You shot them, didn't you? When I asked you the question, Jonathan, to save your life and the life of your wife and your kids, you shot me when I was threatening your life, and the only way to stop me is to kill me. You shot them. So who is responsible for the death of these innocent people? You. You're Hamas. I'm Israel. Did I get that backwards? No,
Well,
I'm Hamas. You're Israel.
Yeah, but it seems as though you are, so let me try to state it a little differently then. Let me pause the time clock. The proposal is that there should be a Palestinian state outside of the territory, somewhere else. And you do pretty clearly state in your articles that, they support Hamas and polls and elections and so on and so forth. Yes, there are, 10-year-old children who have no response, whatever. But as you're saying right now, Hamas committed these atrocities. But then we're going to go and say, we're going to take the entire, so I understand it, the entire Palestinian population and relocate them to somewhere outside of the territories. I don't see how that is not a form of collective punishment, which is penalizing people who are not involved in the atrocities for actions committed by people who were involved in the atrocities.
Well, I would say that those dozens who want to leave and go elsewhere, they should be free to go and set up their government in Africa or God knows where. And if they want to stay, they should not have a government. Rather, they should be under the control of the Israelis. Let's compare and contrast. You see, Ben puts words in my mouth. I say that there are rocket launchers in residential areas and in mosques and in hospitals, and he says that I'm saying everyone has one. No, everyone doesn't have one, but many do, and it's hard for the Israelis to tell which is which. And Ben's solution is pretty much for Israel to commit suicide. Let's look at that rape business. On October 7th, there was mass rape. Recently, there was a claim that there was rape of a Palestinian prisoner. I don't know if that's true, but stipulate that it's true. Look at how the two groups looked at that rape. Did the Hamas penalize the rapists of Israeli women? No, they gave them a pension. They gave them an award. How did the Israeli government react to the possible rape? They said, we got to look at this. And if it occurred, we got to punish the people responsible. Israel is a civilized country. Is it a perfect country? No, not a perfect country. It's a civilized country. The Hamas are, what do they say? Human animals? Human animals is too good, too nice a way to call them. They're not human animals. Animals are decent people. These people are way lower than human animals. I'm not sure what the right word is. These people are vicious, and to let them have a state in Gaza and their what do you call it? Their constitution says that there should be another October 7th. Well, Israel should stand by twiddling its thumbs and allow another October 7th? No, a million times no.
And I'm just going to say that that was my fault. You're supposed to have 5 minutes to respond, so I'm going to put 2 more minutes on there.
Oh, I was pushing.
Yeah, that is my fault. But we're supposed to have 5 minutes apiece to respond to my question.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just reiterate. Ben also raises the Ukraine situation. He says that many fewer people in Ukraine are being killed by the Russians, and I guess vice versa. That's because the Ukrainians are not using their people as shields. That's because this is more of a traditional war. And even Germany didn't use the Nazis, and you can't get much lower than the Nazis unless it's the Soviets. I don't know. Each one is worse than the other, but they never used their own people as shields. This is something totally new. The Nazis didn't use Germans as shields. The Italians didn't. The Japanese didn't in World War II. Hamas does. And you have to distinguish between purposefully aiming at civilians, which Israel doesn't do and Hamas does do, on the one hand, and collateral damage. And this is something that Ben is not giving credence to. It's crucially important. The reason that there are fewer people in Ukraine, civilians dying, is because they're not being used as shields. Now, Ben, you shouldn't put words in my mouth. You shouldn't say that I think every house, every mosque, every hospital has one, but some do. And if you're going to say that none do, well, I have to throw up my hands and say, I used to have a full head of hair, but look at me now. It's all your fault. I'm kidding. But we disagree as to the facts there.
Right. So Ben, you have 5 minutes to respond.
Yeah. So there are several things I want to make sure that I hit here. First of all, I think Walter misheard me. I didn't say that he said that there was a rocket launcher in every home, every mosque, every church, every hospital in Gaza. I said that he seemed to think, right, because he said, oh, it's okay for them to do this because, if there's a rocket launcher there, then it would clearly be absurd to believe that there was a rocket launcher in all of these schools, churches, mosques, hospitals, et cetera, in Gaza that have been bombed. I think that realistically, it's incomprehensible to me that anybody believes that there's even a significant percentage of them that have rocket launchers in them once you start to look at the numbers, or you start to look at the footage of Gaza, where every single building has been razed to the ground. There was a UN video recently that is very striking on this, right? It is just fields and fields of nothing, of rubble, which is also, by the way, a big theme in these Israeli soldier TikTok videos that, they're gloating over how everything is razed to the ground. This is probably one of the best documented atrocities in the history of the world, because unlike most, it's actually being documented publicly by the perpetrators themselves at a grassroots rank and file level. As far as since Walter again raised the point about letting them have a state in Gaza, I think there was never a sense in which Gaza was anything remotely like an independent state. And this is a point that every human rights organization made at the time. And I suppose, as with human rights organizations investigating claims of human shielding and finding out that it's simply not true time after time after time, you can tell yourself if you want that every otherwise respected human rights organization in the world has a horrible anti-Israel bias. I think at a certain point that gets deeply implausible, especially when Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem say the same thing. What happened in Gaza with the disengagement was not creating a state. In fact, Netanyahu said many, many times Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister at the time, his advisors who are still alive, have said many, many times that a big part of the reason they did that was to slow down momentum toward the creation of a Palestinian state, to prevent there from being a Palestinian state through divide and conquer. That if Gaza was ruled by Hamas, the dominant Palestinian force in the West Bank was the Palestinian Authority, then this divide and conquer strategy would make it harder for there to be momentum in the direction of a Palestinian state. And what happened doesn't look like a state in any way, shape, or form. States control their borders. They have armies, they have navies. They certainly can import food on their own without needing the permission of an outside state. What Gaza was for the 17 years leading up to October 7th was much more like an open-air prison camp than a state, as many, 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 many people pointed out at the time. That you are talking about a teensy tiny strip of land which had its air, land, and sea borders completely controlled in every way by the Israeli army. If they'd ever tried to, build a base, for example, it certainly would have been bombed to smithereens immediately. That's not a state, that's a prison. As far as the claim about Hamas statistics, the Ministry of Health in Gaza is no more Hamas than its Israeli equivalent is Likud. In fact, the Israeli Ministry of Health numbers have been verified by international observers after every previous conflict. And the idea that they're suddenly, making it up wildly now is really based on nothing. In fact, the Israelis themselves, for many purposes, will actually cite the Ministry of Health numbers, but say, oh, see, here are all the terrorists we killed. In fact, I think realistically, the Ministry of Health numbers almost certainly vastly overestimate the actual death toll, given that they are very scrupulous about only counting it when they actually have a confirmed corpse, and given the total destruction of the medical infrastructure in Gaza as hospital after hospital is razed to the ground, doctors flee for their lives, etc. I think it would be logistically almost impossible for that not to be a severe undercount. And I'm running out of time, so I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, Ben or Walter, if you would like to respond, I'd like to get another question in for Ben, without taking all night. So 2 minutes to respond.
Sure. Rocket launchers aren't the only reason that the IDF would level a building. There's also the fact of booby trapping. There's also the fact that the Hamas soldiers are hiding there. They leave booby traps. And if the IDF wants to get rid of Hamas, they could waste a lot of lives of the Jewish soldiers, which I don't think is a great idea. I think that Gaza was an open air prison. I agree. Why? Why were they in open air prison? Bibi Netanyahu, I gave a wonderful quote from Golda Meir. I want to give one from Bibi. Bibi said that if we put down our weapons, there'd be no more Israel. If they put down their weapons, there would be peace. What Israel wanted for Gaza was to become the Hong Kong of the East, of the Middle East. But instead, what they did is they poisoned their kids against Israel. They engaged in these tunnels, which launched suicide bombers. Of course, it's an open-air prison. It should be an open-air prison. And the prison was too soft. They should have kicked a lot more prisoners' butt. I'm a critic of Israel, and Israel is too soft. They tolerate look, if Canada started bombing Seattle, there'd be no more Canada. Israel is too tolerant of these people. I'll stop now.
Okay, Ben, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think that the problem with these scenarios about, oh, there's an attack on the United States from Canada, therefore surely we would be okay with committing genocide against the Canadians. By the way, for the record, I would not. But the problem with this stuff is that to the degree that it's tempting, it's because as Americans, we put ourselves in the shoes of the Israelis in this scenario. Then, rather than the shoes of the Palestinians. But of course, you could very easily imagine a Palestinian Walter Block who makes exactly the same criticism on the other end. Say, look, if the United States, if somebody had done to the United States even 0.1% of what Palestinians have gone through at the hands of Israel, we would wipe them out. So October 7th was too soft. It should have included, I don't know, suitcase nukes, right? I would find that horrifying, but I find this horrifying for exactly the same reason. And I would suggest, if you want to respond, I'm glad about the acknowledgement that Gaza was much more like an open air prison than it was like an independent state. But Walter's next move was to say, oh, well, why is it like that? It's because Hamas, and Hamas does all these horrible things. I would say, why does Hamas exist in the first place? Hamas wasn't even formed until decades into the long-term subjugation of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza as permanent non-citizen subjects of the state of Israel. And of course, there are people who are going to want to join an organization like Hamas as long as that systematic brutalization continues. We know exactly what would happen if the Palestinians, put down their weapons, or certainly at least most of their weapons, because we tested that between 1967 and the First Intifada. And what happens is systematic dispossession and permanent stateless subjugation.
Great. That actually does lead right into I think it leads right into the question that I did want to ask Ben. And it gets to the issue of Israeli security, the issue of Hamas and why it exists and so on. And we had a conversation on the Merion West podcast where you said that it really doesn't seem feasible to think that the complete eradication of Hamas is possible, just not plausible. But it seems that on the flip side, is it really plausible to expect that, as I understand sort of what you're trying to get at least among other things, that the unwinding of apartheid, making Israel a quote unquote true democracy, is that really going to be sufficient to dissolve the tensions such that Hamas no longer has the motivation to attack Israel? So I guess, in other words, why should we trust that Hamas, its allies, state sponsors, whoever, would be any better in a world without this alleged apartheid state? How much of these Israeli restrictions that we associate either with security or apartheid, basically restrictions on Palestinian life in the territories and so on, how much is that a function of simply pure Jewish ethno-nationalism versus a serious and legitimate concern about the peculiar circumstances of its national security? Is it wishful thinking to think that, quote unquote, unwinding apartheid is sufficient to at least significantly dissolve the tensions in this region? And let me give you 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say first on my own position that I would see Israel simply giving citizenship to everybody who's lived within its borders for the last 57 years as, my first choice, much like Walter would see anarcho-capitalism as his first choice, but the same way that he'd have, he'd say, if we can't have that, let's at least, for God's sake, have some classical liberalism. I would say that a distant second option, but I would certainly take it as better than nothing, would be an independent Palestinian state. Either way, the one thing that seems totally unacceptable to me is to keep millions of people as permanent non-citizen subjects of a violently hostile ethno-state. Nothing could ever justify that. And you said, alleged apartheid. I'm really fascinated by this question of how this could not.
Let me just say that I'm just trying to be as neutral as possible here. I'm not trying to take a position. So just wanted to clarify.
Okay. All right. Well, the issue has been raised, right? So
yes, fair enough. Fair enough.
think this could possibly not count. That again, Israeli politicians themselves are very clear on this, that the reason why they have never considered extending citizenship to the people they've ruled over for 57 years and the people they plan on ruling over for the next 57 years. Remember, Netanyahu has said over and over and over again, there will never be a Palestinian state. The Knesset recently voted overwhelmingly that there will never be a Palestinian state. By the way, earlier Walter talked about the rape of a Palestinian prisoner. What happened at Sde Taiman was a systematic rape of Palestinian prisoners that many people defended on major Israeli television channels and on the floor of the Knesset. But this is so. If you have millions of people who've been ruled over for the last 57 years as non-citizen subjects, who will continue presumably to be ruled over for the next 57 years as non-citizen subjects, but if they had the right ethnicity, they would become citizens, right? The explicitly stated reason, I've never met a Zionist who's been shy about this. The explicitly stated reason for saying these people could never be Israeli citizens is that if they were made citizens, that would change the ethnic character of the state. Well, if there are some people who live within your borders who have all the rights of citizens and some people who don't, and the reason they don't, again, very explicitly, this is before, decades before Hamas, for example, is it would change the ethnic character of the state to make them citizens, then yes, I'm sorry, that's apartheid. And the existence of Arab lawyers and doctors and Knesset members is as irrelevant to that as the very real existence of Black doctors and lawyers, and even a few members of Congress from states where Black people were allowed to vote, and say 1940 meant that there was racial equality in the United States, and that there wasn't apartheid in all of those states where Black people were not allowed to vote. Okay, so yes, I would like to undo this, whether in the form of what I think would be best, which is just giving everybody equal rights within the state that already exists, or being more pragmatic about what's likely to happen. Through some sort of, two-state partition, but one way or the other, I think the current situation is apartheid. That's unacceptable. Now, if I got what I wanted, this is the question. I want to make sure I'm really directly answering it, right? If I got what I wanted, would that mean that, Hamas, would go away? They wouldn't do anything. There would never be another Hamas attack. I would say that, of course, it's always possible with any kind of peace settlement that you have militant factions who won't accept the settlement. I'd point to, the existence of groups like the Real IRA after the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. But the question is this going to be something that young Palestinian men are going to be eager to throw away their lives to join, that is going to be easy to recruit for when the situation that inspires all of this rage that any of us would feel if we were in the same situation has gone away? And I don't think so. I think this would be a much more manageable threat under those circumstances. And I think that doing what Israel is doing now, if your goal was to guarantee future October 7th, you could not do better to achieve that goal than inflicting the kind of horrors that Israel has been inflicting for the last 10 months that are going to inspire many, many Palestinians to want revenge like anybody would in the same situation.
Okay, great. Walter, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Ben asks, why is there Hamas in the first place? I would say it's due to anti-Semitism. Look, if the Israeli government was so bad in 1948, it only started in 1948, but there were pogroms before that in 1929. There were many pogroms before the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. So it's very difficult to blame the State of Israel for the difficulties. I think Ben is misusing the word apartheid. Look, in South Africa, there was apartheid. In Israel, there's not apartheid. As I mentioned, there are Arab doctors, professors, police officers, judges, members of Knesset. You didn't have anything like that in South Africa, and South Africa is sort of the be all and end all of the paradigm case of apartheid. So I think he's misusing the word. The UN has condemned Israel more than twice as much as every other country in the world. Let me say that again. The US has condemned Israel more than twice as much as every other country in the world. There's a lot of Jew hatred out there. The Hamas convention says kill all Jews, not just Israelis, all Jews. It's hard to deal with people like that. It's hard to make an agreement with people like that. One of my favorite cartoons is a Palestinian with a little baby on, not a rabbit and not a pig, but a little baby on his lap, and the baby has got a dynamite all around him, and the aphorism says, "Kill all Jews." And the UN guy tells Bibi Netanyahu, "Can't you meet them halfway? Meet them halfway when they want to kill all Jews? Come on, give me a break." Ben asked, what could justify this maltreatment of Gazans? You know what could justify it? October 7th. October 7th could justify it. If that were the only thing, it would more than justify it, but it's not the only thing. It's the icing on top. There's many, every day there's a rocket ship, not only from Hamas, but from Hezbollah, from the Houthis, and God knows what Iran is going to be doing. Ben doesn't like them to be ruled over. He wants them to be free, to have their own country. Well, then they promised more October 7th. But what kind of a country would Israel be if they acceded to allowing Hamas, their bitter enemy, to have control over anything? No, they should eradicate Hamas, put them all in jail. Ben thinks that the carrot is better than the stick. He thinks there'll be a lot of resentment. Yes, there'll be a lot of resentment. A lot of the resentment comes from the educational system of Gaza. And I think Israel should have the Ministry of Education. Now, I could see the anarcho-capitalist in me saying, what? But from the classical liberal point of view, Israel should be in charge of the education of those kids. They're being miseducated. The Hamas convention says kill them all. It doesn't make a distinction between them. Anti-Semitism is rife. Why else would the UN condemn Israel twice as much as all other countries put together? It's hard to see if there weren't anti-Semitism. Ben mentions that Gaza is a little sliver of an area. Yeah, it's a little sliver. Well, Israel's a little sliver compared to all the land owned by the Arabs. The Arabs own 99% of the whole place, and they can't allow the Jews to have a Jewish country. No, I don't think it's wise to allow your bitter enemy to have a country. I think it's much more, and it's not just either. These people are murderers. They came in on October 7th, and what they did was disgusting. It was despicable. And now we should give them a country. It doesn't seem reasonable. It seems more like Ben is trying to get the Israelis to commit suicide. And yes, some of the people with the rapist who was accused of raping, I don't know if he did, and then there were Israelis that try to stop the Israeli government from trying them. But at least the Israeli government is trying to try them. The Hamas doesn't try any Hamas rapists. It's a night and day situation, and I'm shocked that Ben can't see the distinction.
Great. Right on time there. Okay, so I'll give 2 minutes to Ben and then 2 minutes to Walter to respond to that. I just want to note that we are basically about approaching an hour. I did have a question for both of you, but it's actually, I think, one question that both of you can answer. But I just wanted to, we can do one of two things. Ben can take his 2 minutes, Walter can take his 2 minutes, and then we can go into closing arguments, or we can allow for one more, back and forth based on a question. I leave it to you to tell us how much time you want to allow. Do you want to not have an additional question, or you do?
You're in charge as far
Okay.
as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
Whatever-
well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we did plan a little bit over an hour. So why don't we go with Ben for 2 minutes, and then I'll ask a question, which I think really both of you can, it's not really slanted one or the other way, I think. So Ben, 2 minutes to what Walter was saying. You're on mute.
Sorry. Walter's answer to why does Hamas exist in the first place is anti-Semitism, which is a very confusing answer because Hamas didn't exist until the 1980s when the Israeli occupation had already been going on for decades. It seems like a very strange coincidence if you think, oh, this is just a sudden upsurge of anti-Semitism in the 80s, rather than a response to very specific and non-mysterious circumstances that would cause any population anywhere in the world to have a lot more recruits for a militant, violent organization. That seems like a vastly more parsimonious explanation. He brings up pogroms before 1948. I would actually argue, and I have to say, I don't normally like to do this, but I'm going to indulge in a little identity politics for 30 seconds as a descendant of people who fled to this country from actual pogroms in what was then the Russian Empire. I find trying to annex the riots in 1929 to that to be a bit much, since, of course, what happened there is that you had the imperial power that runs the place had said, hey, this place where you guys live, we're going to make this the site of a future ethno-state for this other ethnic group that's going to come in now. I think that leading to riots without defending the riots themselves, I think is a little bit different from a classical pogrom. But what I find really revealing about this is talking about, you're talking about 1929. There's no Israel, there's no Palestinian Liberation Organization, there's no Palestinian Authority, there's no Hamas. None of the players exist. So at this point, you're just thinking in terms of these ethnic hive minds, these great collectivist categories, Arabs, Jews. We heard that Arabs had 99% of the Middle East, as if this were all a big group. And my God, what happened to that classical liberal individualism?
Okay, Ben, Walter, 2 minutes.
I'm delighted that Ben sees the error of his socialist ways and is now upholding private property rights. He very much is upset that Arab houses are being bombed. It's amazing to have a socialist come out and favor private property rights, and I acknowledge I might even be able to convert him to classical liberalism, because if he really likes private property rights, that's great. But not if the house is owned by somebody like this. Then property rights go by the wayside. Look, if I rob a bank and then they take away my car or something, I'm not the proper owner of that car. Criminals should be punished. And yes, some of these people are innocent, but the people responsible are Hamas, not Israel. A lot of the time we're having a chicken and egg situation. Who started this? Well, the Israelis did something bad. Ben would say, I would say the other guys did things bad. You have to go back to who was the rightful owner of the property in the first place. And I am a fan of John Locke, who is a hero of anarcho-capitalists as well as classical liberals. And what he says is the proper owner of the property is the one who was there first. The Jews are not the colonialists. The Jews are the rightful owners because they were there first. So when when property is taken away from Arabs, that property didn't properly belong to them in the first place. The property properly belonged to the Jews. So Ben, if you really like private property rights, you have to take the Jewish view.
Okay, great. So I want to ask this question. It's really a question for both of you. And so I guess maybe take 5 minutes apiece. And basically, you were kind of already addressing the question in this last couple of these last comments. And I guess this is just kind of a way of maybe phrasing it. Ben brought up identity politics, and you both have been kind of arguing on the basis of certain principles at stake. But what I kind of find interesting in this is you both are Jewish, at least as I understand, and you at the same time have very radically different philosophical backgrounds. And the question that I was kind of interested in is the extent to which you arrive at very, very different positions on this issue of Palestinian statehood, and then all the issues that surround that, the war and apartheid and so on. And to what extent this, I get the sense, my takeaway here at this point is that Ben is arguing mainly on the basis of principles, of liberalism, and maybe to some extent democratic socialism, and that Walter is also arguing to some extent on principles, but also based on the basis of Israeli identity. In other words, protecting the nation and so on. And basically, the question is like, to what extent does identity versus principles, how do you kind of mesh these two together to explain your position? And it's a little bit of a general question. But I guess maybe to make it a little more specific, I would ask, which is more important, your principles, the principles or the identity? Or is that really kind of a false dichotomy of some sort? And feel free to use this question to address some of the other issues that have been coming up. I guess maybe we can start with Ben, because Walter was just speaking, and we'll go with 5 minutes and then maybe back and forth, then we'll move to closing.
Okay, cool. So yeah, as I hope was clear, the tone of my half-joking reference to identity politics earlier, identity politics is not something I'm generally a fan of. I think that yes, I think that the same rights that should apply to Jews should apply to Palestinians, should apply to Ukrainians, should apply to Russians, should apply to everybody. And what those principles are, of course, is, as you suggest, an important point in dispute between Walter and myself. But my sense is that he's somewhat misidentifying where the difference lies. So if you go back and read my first article in the exchange with Walter and Merion West, this is actually, I think, right, the issue that I spent the most time on. And one of the points I made here is that what we're arguing about, I mean, part of what's so confusing to me about Walter's position is that it's not just a inconsistency point about him, although I do definitely see an inconsistency there. It's that I think that the sort of principles you would need to get to my position here really aren't part of what I ever thought were a dispute between Walter and myself. In other words, sure, democratic socialism, libertarianism, etc. These are all ideologies that evolve from some very basic principles of Enlightenment era liberalism. None of them are exactly identical to it. Even what John Locke believed is not exactly what anarcho-capitalists believed, although there are parts of it that that certainly inspire it. There are elements there, but I think that the sort of basic idea that there's a certain package of rights everybody should have just for being a person does unite the perspectives. We disagree about what rights go in that package. Do they include extremely extensive property rights to every dollar in your bank account, or are the property rights more limited than that? There are much bigger. There are definitely big differences there. By the way, Walter, I think you'll find if you talk to more socialists that socialists don't like private property and the means of production. But they tend to be much friendlier towards personal property. Your homes, your children's toys, your underwear, right? All of these things that, as sort of put on grisly display in all of those Israeli TikTok videos, have been systematically stolen from millions of Palestinians in Gaza. And I want to see if possible, right? Since you did say we could throw in, some response to what came earlier into this. I did want to just hit a couple of things from the last thing that Walter said. He's made a big point both just now in his opening statement of saying, well, Jews were there first, and even aside from the fact that everybody actually, I think a Israeli Jewish fan who, after an article I'd written about this before, is a math geek, was inspired to do a little bit of back of the napkin arithmetic, and he did a really nice blog post on this. That even with groups that are that heavily resist intermarriage, given the teensiest, tiniest bit of intermarriage over the years, just about everybody alive now is a descendant of just about everybody who was alive a few thousand years ago. So that's not going to help you very much. But I'd also point out there's an interesting inconsistency here, because as I recall, this actually came up when I debated Walter before. Because of course, look, what about the Native Americans? White people in the United States not truly have a right to stay in their homes and, to have their personal property because Native Americans were there first, some sort of, future Native American state would have a right to ethnically cleanse them? I certainly don't think so. I'd be interested if Walter thinks so. I remember part of his response to that, if I'm remembering correctly from this earlier debate, he can correct me. Part of his response was, oh, well, Native Americans really only had homesteading rights to certain parts of it because they didn't spread out to all of it. But look, I guarantee you that those ancient Jewish kingdoms thousands of years ago spread out less, farmed less, did less, checked fewer lock-in boxes than Palestinian Arabs did in, say, the late 19th century, right? Just given the technological difference between those two time periods.
Okay, so Walter, I guess to the extent that you want to address this question about, reconciling identity with principles and so on, and how that factors into the use. And then again, feel free to address any other points that you want to address. 5 minutes.
Well, I think that my views are based totally and solely on principle and have nothing to do with Jewish identity. I would make the same exact points if it were Christians or Muslims or Martians or anyone else. I'm a libertarian, and I believe in the non-aggression principle, and I believe in private property rights based on homesteading, and I apply that equally everywhere, to the Native Americans, to the Jews, to, you name it. So there's no Jewish ethnicity in this for me. It's rather a matter of justice. And I think the justice just happens to be in favor of the Jewish side. Now, Jonathan, you make an interesting point. You say, I didn't know Ben was Jewish. There are Jews who are opponents of mine on this issue. Left-wing Jews, before October 7th, you know what they were doing? They were having massive demonstrations about the Supreme Court. And they were saying that what Bibi Netanyahu wanted to do on the Supreme Court was anti-democratic. What he wanted to do is to make it roughly like the U.S. Supreme Court. In Israel, when an opening occurs because of a retirement or a death or whatever, guess who picks the replacement? The present members of the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court never changes its ideology. Whereas in the U.S., when somebody dies or passes away or retires, the president, with the consent of the Congress, and it keeps changing because the Democratic vote is changing, and the Democratic vote has some sort of say. But the left-wing Jews were saying, oh, no, you can't change this because it's undemocratic, which I think is nonsense. And I think that to some degree, the blame for October 7th rests with the left-wing Jews in Israel and the left-wing Jews in the U.S. that supported them. Because look at it from Hamas's point of view. Here, they're practically having a civil war. And the best way to attack a country is when they're divided. So I'm not a big fan of these left-wing Jews. They vote for the Democratic Party, 80%? I think that's crazy. We're supposed to be smart. We're supposed to have a good IQ. I don't know what happened. With regard to the natives, right now in the U.S. we have 360 million, roughly. If you take a plane from Boston to L.A., east of the Mississippi, you'll see a few lights. West of Mississippi, except for Denver and Las Vegas, it's empty. The whole place is empty, and we have 360 million people. How many Native Americans were there before the Europeans came? The best estimate is 3 to 5 million. Well, if 360 million can't fill up the place, 3 to 5 million can fill up this much. So the idea that they own the whole country is just silly. It's a perversion of Lockeanism. Whereas with the Jews, I mean, Israel is a small place. Yes, the Kohanim built the second temple. You think that they restricted themselves just to the second temple? No, they spread around. Israel isn't that big. I think the whole place is about as big as New Jersey. So I reject this idea that somehow doesn't matter who was there first in terms of who were the rightful owners and who should be kicking who out. Now, I agree with Ben that all human beings have equal rights, with one exception. Criminals lose their rights. To the extent that they're criminals, they lose their rights. Look, if I grab Ben and frog marched him into a prison, I would be guilty of kidnapping because Ben is an innocent person. But if Ben were a rapist or a murderer or a thief or something, and I frog marched him into a prison, I'm not violating his rights. Hamas is a bunch of criminals. They don't have equal rights. Look at what they did on October 7th. And to tell me that they have equal rights and that it shouldn't be an open air prison for them, look at what they did. This was despicable what they did. And it wasn't accidental and it wasn't collateral damage. They were purposefully aiming at civilians, and that's genocide. And Israel doesn't purposely aim at civilians. Yes, let's stipulate that there was a rape. I don't know if it was true, but let's stipulate there was a rape. How did the Israeli government deal with it? They were going to find out if it was, and if it was, they were going to punish them. Yes, Ben is right. There were some people who were trying to save these possible rapists. People get angry during October 7th. But the difference between the two is so gigantic, I'm shocked Ben can't see it.
Okay, so I wanted to move into the closing, but you raised the issue of left-wing Jews. I know Ben has written about that. I don't know, I could be wrong. We're talking a lot about.
Yeah, okay.
We're talking a lot about vibes in the election right now. I had the vibe that Ben really wanted to address that point, and I thought maybe I would give each you one more minute each. So I give Ben a quick minute, Walter a quick minute, then right into closing.
Sorry, am I misremembering this? I thought that we'd both done our 5 minutes and Walter had done his 2 minutes just now.
He just had 5 minutes.
He just had 5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah. So I asked a question about, identity and
lost track. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So 1 minute for Ben, because I had a feeling he really wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about all of that. So as far as the Israeli Supreme Court, actually, in many ways, Bibi's proposal would make it less like the U.S. Supreme Court because it would have less power to strike down laws. The reason he wanted to do that is part of the long-term plan to annex big parts of the West Bank. In fact, 2023, before October 7th, was the biggest year on record for settler pogroms against Palestinians in the West Bank. There's an area from about Ramallah to Jericho, in between those two cities, that have been almost completely cleared of Palestinian inhabitants before October 7th. It's one of the reasons October 7th happened in the first place. I would also say, if you want to talk about who to blame for that, I think that those settlers, destabilizing the West Bank enough to divert a lot of the Israeli military to there had a lot more to do with what created vulnerability for October 7th. Man, I really wanted to address a bunch of the rest of this, but I am out of time.
Okay, well, you have 5 minutes to close as well, so we can try to you can try to address it there as well. Walter, if you wanted to take a minute.
Sure. Which is more democratic? An elected body like the Knesset or the Congress, or a body that's not elected but appointed like the Supreme Court? Obviously, the Knesset is more democratic. So it defies reason to say that Bibi was anti-democratic. Yes, he wanted to not only make it impossible for them to replicate themselves because they appointed their own new members. He also wanted to curtail them a little bit. And what are they doing? They're basing their argument on reasonableness. and he wanted to have somebody in his cabinet. And the Supreme Court was saying, no, you can't have this guy in the cabinet. Well, is that democratic? So I think that, and look, the way you settle this is through elections. We just had 5 elections in the last 3 years. I'm not sure I'm counting right, but these mass protests were not democratic.
Okay, so essentially, I think we've more or less followed the format. I was a little flexible, and the back and forth kind of extended the time a little. So we made the second question 1 for both of you. You took 5 minutes, then 1 minute. So in some sense, there was a little bit of adaptiveness to here. So I know that Ben really wants to address a lot of these points, and I want to try to be as fair as possible in not only in terms of balancing things, but also allowing the full free flow of information. So why don't we take closing arguments and add a minute, so 6 minutes apiece. And I think, I'm not sure whether we were supposed to end up where Walter just finished and now we'll go into the closing, but since you opened, why don't you, Walter, that is, take the floor, 6 minutes to make a closing argument / statement.
Okay.
And there.
First of all, I want to thank you 2 guys. I especially want to thank you both, Jonathan, for putting this together, and Ben for being a civil debater with me. I mean, there are a lot of people I mentioned at the beginning: Hans Hoppe, Tom DiLorenzo, Mike Rechtenwald, Ryan McMakin. They refused to debate me. How else are we going to get 1/millionth of an inch closer to the truth with a capital T if you don't debate? All they do is they make nasty criticisms of me. They say I'm not really a libertarian because we disagree on this one issue. I mean, libertarians disagree on tons of issues. Murray Rothbard was pro-choice. Ron Paul was pro-life. Hans Hoppe is, what do you call it, restricted immigration. Bumper Hornberger is open immigration. We libertarians disagree on a lot. Why should the one issue of Israel be so crazy that you can't even talk in a civil manner? I regard the answer is Israel derangement syndrome, which I admit is not an explanation, but at least it's putting a label on it. And I think that they're guilty of that. And Ben is not. Ben has the decency to debate me, and in a civil manner, in a rational manner. We don't agree. We agree on very little, but I very appreciate Ben's contribution to this. My best shot, I'm sorry I can't help myself. Here's a pig, here's a rabbit, and I'm now going to attack Jonathan with my knife. Here's my knife. It's actually a pen. Don't worry, I'm not going to get you. And Jonathan shoots me in self-defense, as he has every right to do, because he wants to protect his wife and kids, who I'm going to kill all. I'm going to kill them all. I'm a vicious guy. I'm Hamas. And Jonathan kills them. And he kills 40,000 of them. Who is responsible for those 40,000 deaths? It's not the IDF, even though it's IDF bombs and bullets that are the proximate cause. But the ultimate cause is Hamas. Hamas uses them as shields. It doesn't put a rocket launcher in every mosque or in every hospital or in every school, but it puts them there. What other country ever did that? I mean, this is despicable. And then they say, well, Israel is the bad guy because Israel is killing a lot of innocent people. Well, my understanding of the proportion of killing between civilians and military is that Israel is responsible for a 1-to-1 balance. I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but my understanding also is that is perhaps the lowest level of civilians ever. Israel is very cautious about killing civilians. It keeps sending leaflets. What other country ever sent out leaflets? And then Ben says, well, they were in North Gaza and then they were told to go to South Gaza. Well, look, Hamas keeps moving around and Israel keeps trying to find them. Ben's analysis here is, in effect, calling for Israeli suicide. And I'm not just opposed to Israeli suicide. I'm opposed to anyone's suicide when they're the victims. The right reaction to a violent invasion is not suicide. Jonathan didn't commit suicide when I was threatening him with my shields. Nobody should commit suicide. Let me just repeat that thing about rape. Yes, let's stipulate that some Israel soldiers raped a Palestinian man. The reaction of the Israeli government was to look and see if it's true, and if it's true, to punish them. Contrast that with the rape that they committed on October 7th and many other times. Hamas is applauding them. Hamas has a convention to kill all Jews. How do you deal with people like that? Do you give them a country right next to yours? Look, the anarcho-capitalist view is everyone should have his own country. We should have 8 billion countries, 8 billion, and everyone should be sovereign. Great, but not criminals. Criminals belong in jail. Hamas is a criminal. They don't belong anywhere near a state, even though states are criminal according to anarcho-capitalism, but not according to classical liberalism. It's very important who was there first. The Second Temple was built underneath the mosque. If it's underneath, it was there first. The Jews have been around, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 years. The Islamic people around 1,400 years, give or take. The Jews were there first. They're not the colonists. They're not the invaders. And when they take property that the Palestinians were occupying, they are returning stolen property. And if we want to adhere to the principles of property, and classical liberals also favor private property, we have to support that. Now, Ben says socialists support housing. I think he's wrong on his own theory. Housing is seen as a capital good. And yes, you can own your pajamas and your underwear, but you can't own your own house. I might be wrong. Ben might correct me on that. Thanks again to you two for allowing me to be part of this.
Okay, great. I will now turn it over to Ben. Let me start the clock. Oh, you're muted again. All right.
Thanks. I just want to reiterate that the argument that Walter makes about the Native Americans and why he and I have a right not to be ethnically cleansed is all about the growth in the population. And of course, that argument applies many times over in Israel-Palestine, even accepting the Lockean premise, which of course I think is total nonsense, but that's a debate for a different time, that the entire population of the world 3,000 years ago was about 14 million people. The current population of Israel-Palestine is actually more than that, right? The number of Jewish homes that were in ancient Israel, even disregarding the fact that everybody alive today in the world, outside of maybe that island where they're always shooting bows and arrows at missionaries, is descended from those people, because everybody is descended from those 14 million people who were alive 3,000 years ago. Even putting that aside, all of his points about Native Americans go much harder for this situation. But I want to focus on the core of the issue. Between us on human shields, I would just say I wrote an article for Jacobin called "The Human Shields Defense of Bombing Gaza Civilians is Morally Bankrupt." I go into all the arguments there at length. So if you want to know my full pig and rabbit thoughts, check out that article. But I want to focus on the original topic, which is about dispossession, about the idea that it would be okay to banish the entire Palestinian population and have a Palestinian state somewhere else. Walter says criminals lose their rights, but what does being a criminal mean here, so that not just people who commit atrocities, but an entire ethnic category including those people, all the millions of people who lived in an area can be counted as criminals and lose their rights. Walter wants to expel millions of Palestinians because the atrocities carried out by 30,000 Hamas fighters. That's the usual estimate for the total number of fighters before October 7th, 30,000 out of a population of 2.3 million, which is one of the many reasons I don't believe anything like that 1-to-1 ratio or even 2 or 3-to-1. But put that aside, Israel has committed many atrocities of the same kind, but on a staggeringly greater scale. Current UN estimates say it would take about a century to rebuild Gaza after what Israel's done in the last 10 months. And it practices universal conscription, making its atrocity committing force a vastly larger proportion of the population than Hamas is of Gaza. So why doesn't he think Israelis have lost all their rights as a result? He seems to think Palestinians, cheering Hamas somehow makes it okay, or voting for Hamas, even though the only election that Hamas won, my understanding is that they didn't even win a majority. It was a plurality, and that was 18 years ago, before a large majority of the current population of Gaza was old enough to vote, before about half of them were even born, unlike Netanyahu, who has actually won several elections. Thus, if we're going to play the collective guilt game, making Israelis far more culpable for his crimes than Palestinians are of Hamas. And like all apologists for Israel expelling millions of innocent Palestinians from their homes in the last 10 months, killing more children in tiny Gaza than all the children who died in all the war zones in the world for years previously, he seems to believe that nothing justifies October 7th, but that October 7th justifies everything. I agree with the first proposition, but I reject the second one, root and branch. I've never had any hesitation condemning war crimes when they're committed by Hamas. And I would certainly be unhappy if my country were sending Hamas 2,000-pound bombs to drop on Israeli children. But the exact same principles that lead me to condemn those crimes lead me to condemn Israel's far worse atrocities many, many, many times over. I think that's a pretty crystal clear moral distinction. Walter thinks that everything's about who counts as an aggressor, and he wants to start the clock on October 7th. But of course, October 7th was just one link in a long, long chain of attacks and counterattacks, atrocities and counter-atrocities that are all rooted in Israel's violently enforced system of apartheid against its permanent non-citizen population, which had been in place for decades before Hamas was even formed. My worldview is, I know, very different from Walter's. And I know I've said this before, but I really want to emphasize this, which is why I want to end on this. I do indeed believe that every human being has a right to have their material needs met, to have healthcare and housing, and longer term also to have a right to voice and vote in what happens in their workplace. So of course I don't believe in the kind of absolutist property rights that he does. Homes are fine; those are not capital goods, not being used for business purposes. But that difference shouldn't matter here. If you acknowledge that Palestinians are human beings, you think all human beings should have the same rights, then whether you think that should be the package of rights that Walter wants or the package of rights I want, that difference should be irrelevant. Palestinians have the same right against ethnic cleansing and the same right to democratic self-government that everybody else in the world has, full stop. And I do not see that as an even slightly complicated question.
Okay. I guess that is it. So thank you both, Ben and Walter, for at least for me, it was a very informative, stimulating, obviously, spirited debate. Hopefully the listeners to this debate will find it as such as I do, as I did as well. So thank you again, and I guess we'll close it there.
All right. I know you're all thinking it. I fucked up. Next time I'll bring some toy animals so people will take my points seriously.
I have to wonder, did he explain that to his 3-year-old granddaughter? And just broke down crying after that.
Yeah. See, if somebody, if somebody in your apartment block was a terrorist, I'm sorry, you'd have to die. I don't make the rules.
Here, you seem to be upset. Let me explain it with a helpful a helpful demonstration with your stuffed animals, because you're clearly not getting this principle, which is based on classical liberalism. No.
Yeah, there's a very, very clear connection between Walter's position in this debate and classical liberalism. I think we can all see that.
Yeah, exactly. That the large divide is fully bridged. Andy, you suggested that his demonstration reminded you of a clip from which I'll let you do the honors.
Yeah, it was from Con Air, the classic Nicolas Cage film, in which a bunch of convicted felons take over a plane, and it's only up to Nicolas Cage, a person being released from prison, who can stop these evil men.
We'll show the clip. I'll say, Ben, I don't know if Lucy, your dog, would have appreciated being included in any kind of demonstration.
Just pick her up, be like, okay, Lucy here.
Yeah, I don't think she would have.
You grab Ash, you know.
Yeah.
Lucy would take that a lot better than Ash would. Cat's not being great about that. I suppose, to be fair, even right now, this is not my home. I'm house sitting right now, but even right now, I do have a couple of squeaky toys around for Lucy, so I could have used those as visual aids. I just don't know why that didn't occur to me. That this is the proper way to present an argument.
Yeah, and then give them an argument too. But anyway, here's the relevant scene from Con Air.
I'm gonna see my daddy for the first time ever on July 14th. Make a move and the bunny gets it.
Oh,
because my birthday is July 14th, and they keep saying my birthday over and over again in the movie. So, beyond the bunny, beyond Dave Chappelle getting thrown out of a plane, and landing on the dude from Stargate's car, but beyond just all the great actors in this film, that's like my favorite part.
Yeah, I'm so jealous that you're born on July 14th. I'd love to be able to say that, like born on the 4th of July. I was born on Bastille Day.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then like having famous socialist Woody Guthrie having the same birthday. Yeah. I mean, that's heavy.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. This was a slightly strange experience. I'm not going to lie. I will say it was after I finished, I was kind of like, okay, I don't know quite what just happened here, and I'm not really sure how I did or anything, just because the whole thing was so odd. But rewatching it, I've got to say I feel good about that. I don't really know, what I could have said that I didn't say.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of he definitely sort of just had his basic points, and they were kind of the classic, a lot of classic propaganda, which again, it's interesting to hear it responded to like you did, but it didn't seem like he was really ready to incorporate any of your points. He kind of just went back to the delivery on the propaganda was definitely strange and super reductive at times, right? But and he didn't have a lot of great defenses for when you called him out on different inconsistencies. I mean, the Native American excuse was one of the more wild attempts to square that circle. The idea that, okay, then why don't we let them have the land? Or I don't know. It's just
well, right, exactly. Because if you're gonna make this argument that, and it's so funny that this was his only example. Because honestly, if I were coaching him here, I think I might say there's lots of archaeology from ancient Israel. It's not just the Second Temple, right? I don't know why you keep going back to that, right? But given that it seemed to be pretty crucial to his argument, right? That he's a hardcore Lockean libertarian. Mm-hmm. He thinks that all that matters when it comes to property rights is that you can trace your claim back through a chain that doesn't involve force or fraud, right? So, or that whatever, that you're descended from the last the last person who had like a legitimate lock-in claim
Yeah.
on the land. Again, even putting aside the point, I try to put it a couple points times, and I think he kind of didn't register that, like, literally pretty much everybody alive in the world today, right? There are several billion people, several billion of us, and it's been thousands of years. Pretty much all of us can, in fact, trace our, like if we trace the family tree back long enough, we could trace it by all sorts of routes to every single one of the 14 million people who was alive in the time period he's talking about, right? Like just given the many times that the population of the world has
Right.
doubled and redoubled since then. But like, even putting that aside, right, if we just pretend that the only people who are descended from ancient Jews or modern Jews and et cetera, right, like look, to whatever extent this justifies saying, oh, no Palestinian has real property rights because they're not descended from the last people who had legitimate rights, however he decides that. Okay, well, neither me nor Walter are descended from Native Americans, or
even the original people who came.
Yeah, right, sure.
I mean,
or even
the original
one, or even the original European settlers. That's right. So it's like, surely we don't have property rights here. And his justification for this is, oh well, see, there were so few Native Americans compared to all the Americans now. There were so few Native Americans there a few hundred years ago that like actually most of the land is fine, right? I mean, maybe that's whatever percentage of it was like literally the same exact square of land was occupied by a Native American. Maybe there's an issue with the property rights there, but everything else is fine. It's like, okay, well, look, obviously I find everything about this argument insane, but like, if we're just gonna run with that, then why doesn't this apply now? I mean, like, again, the entire population of the world in the period of biblical Israel was smaller than the current population of Israel Palestine, right? So like, surely most Palestinian farms were not in fact in places that had been occupied by ancient Jews. So I just, none of this makes any sense to me. I mean, it's one of those things that's like, okay, how much time do you want to spend on this? Because this is like not really, from my perspective, what matters at all. Like, even a little bit, right? Like, because I think that the whole lock-in thing is just total horseshit. Like, I think that honestly, whenever I hear this view that's like people have that all that matters in what counts as a just distribution of property is your chain of interaction with whoever first mixed their labor with it. It's like, this always just strikes me as like a really fancy philosopher's version of like Lucy's theory of property rights, for example, that she believes that if she pees on something, right, then it becomes hers. Or like little boys who are like fighting about like some piece of property, and they're one of them's like, oh, I spit on it, it's mine now, right? Like I think that's about as credible, right, as Lockeanism is as a theory of just entitlements. So I couldn't care less whose ancestors did what. Like, I think all that's totally irrelevant. I think that like I think that it's really horrible to drive somebody off of their home that they live in. And I think every human being has a right to as close as is reasonably possible to get to like a equal share of the world's resources, right? So it's like, I'm not interested in this, but also, if I were to accept his premises, I don't understand how he gets here. And it really is like the thing I think I said a couple times, but I would just really, in the debate itself, but I would just really circle and underline now, is that it's really cannot be overstated how unlibertarian this view is. Like, if you really take libertarian premises seriously, because come on. I mean, that like, it's not just that he's like advocating these like massive rights violations and property rights violations, right? You know, taking away millions of people's homes, but it's also like everything about the way he reasons about this. It's not about individuals. It's about ethnic groups considered as collective entities, like as if they were hive minds, you know, that's like, oh, well, the Jews did this. And, you know, there were a couple times in the debate where it actually became not even the Palestinians, but the Arabs. Right. So it's like, you know, not only it's not even that an entire, like, you know, ethno-national group is a hive mind anymore. It's that like a vast family of nationalities are a hive mind now, right? It's the Arabs, you know, control this. Which is like really the equivalent of saying, it's like, I don't know, like, yeah, if somebody came in and ethnically cleansed a shit ton of white people from the United States, you know, and, you know, maybe the United States as a country didn't exist anymore. And, you know, you objected to it. You said, oh, well, come on. White people have so many countries. They have England, they have France, they have Germany. Like, you need one more. You can't just give us this one, right? Like, no, that's not how anything works.
Yeah, and it seems like there's an inconsistency. Maybe I missed it, but he's like saying they don't get the land because they're criminals, and then they also don't get the land because, you know, from thousands of years ago, they were there second. And I guess it would also be interesting to, like you said, kind of run over all of the examples where now we could say, oh, this group gets to go, like, you know, like whatever, like with the Gauls or Visigoths or whatever, and say, hey, actually, I realized that, like, if you go back to the first farming civilization, yeah, some people were saying the Sumerians, if we could figure out, you know, who all their ancestors are, if he'd be down to run that back, because he wouldn't really need the criminality excuse if that was sufficient, right? If they're all criminals. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, if you have a really loose private property, respect for private property, then maybe you could say, like, well, just because, you know, these innocent people are related to these terrorists, then it's worth, you know, ethnic cleansing them, even if they're innocent, right? Because, like, private property isn't very important. But if you at all consider property and land ownership to be important, then you would think he would at least, you know, advocate for saying, like, anyone convicted of being a terrorist, let alone you just are an Arab or you are a Palestinian, so because a terrorist group, in, you know, supposedly in your name killed Israelis, that you are also being I mean, it's not funny. It's funny that he thinks this.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is very grimly funny. I mean, that, and again, I don't want to repeat too much what I said in the debate, you know, I mean, just kind of let it be as it is, but it's just amazing to me that it's like, what possible theory of collective criminality could you have that would make, you know, all 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, never mind the, you know, 5-something million, you know, you get when you know out in the West Bank, responsible for the actions of 30,000 Hamas fighters.
Yeah.
But Israeli civilians not responsible for the actions of the IDF, which of course many more of them serve in. American civilians not responsible for the actions of America's imperial military machine, which they, you know, which, I mean, again, we saw in the clip that we used as a cold open for this episode, it seems like Walter normally objects to American wars, right? So you know, I'm old enough, he's certainly old enough to remember the period after 9/11 when George W. Bush was starting the forever wars in the Middle East, and he had like a 90% approval rating for a while there, right? Like that's, you know, if you're going to say that people who don't personally do it are responsible because they like celebrate it or whatever, right? It's like, you know, I guess Bush didn't actually win a Democratic election, but he came much closer to getting the majority than Hamas ever did, right? They only got a plurality. You know, Bush got like very close to 50%, and because of our demented electoral system,
right,
he became the winner. So yeah, that seems wildly inconsistent. That why is it that all Palestinians are criminals because of Hamas, but all Americans aren't criminals because of the United States killing 1 million people?
I mean,
in the Middle East.
It would be scary to live in a world in which I mean, if his logic, not his actual position, started to take off, I think we're much closer to a world in which those people that say that Israel's committing genocide would mean that I should be tried.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm Jewish, right? I mean,
or even just that, like, some random Israeli who had nothing to do with it, right? Should
but he's going cross borders, right? With the Arabs have this much land, so
yeah.
He was even
it would be equivalent to, oh, the Jews did this, right? Yeah, totally.
He might not like that so much.
No, and quite rightly, but might want to reflect on the commonality between between those two arguments.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to make one other point, but I forgot what it was. I know Andy was inspired to do a little bit of artwork during the debate.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we have that or not.
Do we have it, or are we just letting people know?
I even did it because I got distracted by the.
Oh no, you did. So let me here. I can do as a screen share if we don't have it. So let's see. Yeah, there we go. It is screen share. There we go. Walter Block's Nakba 2 electric boogaloo.
Oh no.
So,
that is what he wants.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is explicitly what he wants, and it is kind of amazing to me that that's what he advocates in so many words, right? In the articles in Merion West, and he didn't disown it in the debate, but it is interesting how much less comfortable he seemed to be defending his position in the articles than he was in just kind of reciting standard Hasbara's talking points about, with his own unique flavor, with the pig and the rabbit. But like, it rolls off the tongue so much more easily to say, oh no, what are you talking about? Israel isn't ethnically cleansing anybody, than to say his actual position from the articles, which is, but they should.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we are at like half past the hour. So if we're going to do even like a short half an hour post game tonight, we do need to go to that. So I, again, just want to reiterate, if you enjoy the artwork on the show, please do consider donating to the GoFundMe, link down below. In the post game, we are going to take an ethnic cleansing break. A bit of a cleanse from the ethnic cleansing discussion, and we are going to one of the things we're definitely going to do is we're going to watch the new Amon animations, which for my money, this is his masterpiece.
Take your edibles now, so it'll be working by the time post game starts.
Exactly. So we will be there. Oh, and I should say, so if you are a patron, you should already long since have the link in your inbox to the post game. If you are not, there's no time like the present. But if you are not, and you're not in a position to become one right now, so this is the last time I talk to you tonight, I do want to say next Monday should be really fun. So we've got a double header planned out. So in the second half, we've got Matt McManus, who wrote a review of Charlie Kirk's most recent book. So we're going to be talking to Matt about that. And in the first half, we have Storm and Norman Finkelstein on talking about the fall of Robin DiAngelo, who I believe is a character that he wrote about in his book. So I'm really looking forward to all that. I think that should be a really fun episode. Yeah, I hope everybody's already taken those edibles. We will see you in about 2 minutes in the post game. Left is best.